Photoshop has some really great tools for retouching a damaged photo. In this tutorial video, we're going to learn about the three basic tools: the spot healing brush, the healing brush, and the clone stamp tool. Before we learn about those tools, however, let's make sure that we don't damage the original picture by adding a new layer above the photo and renaming it Retouch. We do this because we want to add all of our paint for the retouch on this transparent layer so it doesn't hurt the layer underneath it, and so that it's easy for us to erase any mistakes that we might make. Let's start with the easiest tool. The spot healing brush tool is located on the toolbar, and it looks like a band-aid with a little circle to the left of it. Now, before we actually paint something like this spot right here, I want to explain to you a couple of things with this tool. First, it's not just for round, circular, small spots. You can even retouch this line right here. What you need to keep in mind with the spot healing brush tool is that it needs to be a blemish or a spot or a line that is surrounded by fairly good pixels. Now, this picture is pretty grainy, so you're probably saying these aren't good pixels, but in terms of not having any of these black and white damaged blemishes, it is in fact good pixels. What it's going to do is when you paint, it's going to look around that blemish for the good pixels, paint those pixels, and then blend it in for you. Before we do that, let's make sure that our tool settings are correct. The mode needs to be normal, and we're just choosing content aware, and make sure that sample all layers is checked. Otherwise, it's not going to work because our layer right now is totally transparent. So we need to make sure that it's going to sample all the layers, which is this background layer as well. Now that we know it's set correctly, we're going to paint over that blemish. And once we let go, it's going to blend those pixels in with the pixels around it. So we can even do this line, and it blends it in, and it looks good. Now, if you're ever working on some of these blemishes and you find that it doesn't do a great job the first time, just undo it or step backward in history, do it again, and see if it blends better the second time. If it doesn't, or if you know you're in an area that the spot healing brush tool won't work, such as this area up here, then we're going to change to the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool does the same thing. It'll paint pixels and it'll blend it in so that it looks like a natural part of the picture. But instead of automatically choosing the pixels around it, which we don't want to have happen because we've got a lot of damage around it, let's see if I do it right here. Oops, it's going to come up with this issue option click, and what that's basically telling you is you need to define a source, so you need to tell it where the good pixels are, because if I were to go back to the spot healing brush tool and paint, the pixels around that are damaged, and so it could create milky areas that are kind of blurry and they don't look right. So instead we're going to use the healing brush tool that allows us to choose where the good pixels are and have Photoshop sample from that area. Now make sure whatever area you're fixing that you sample an area of good pixels near it, because these pixels are in good light compared to the light that was hitting these. We wouldn't want to sample here even though these are good pixels because they are in shadow. So for this one, we need to hold the Alt or the Option key, and our mouse temporarily changes to a target, and we need to click once to define that as our source point for our healing. Now you can see when I move my brush over in the center, we have pixels from our source point down here, and we can start painting. If you watch as I paint and look a little bit southeast where my original source point was, you can see a little crosshair that tries to follow my brush, and that's because that's where it's picking those pixels up from. Now, as you're looking at this, you're probably saying that doesn't look right because it's not blended. As soon as you lift your mouse, it's going to try to blend it in for you. Be careful though, because let's say your source point was right here, and you tried to paint it in. See how all of a sudden you start painting in his face because that source point is going to follow you. And then it tries to blend it in. That doesn't look good. So I'll undo that, and be careful around the edges as well. So again, the healing brush tool is still going to blend your pixels. You're just trying to choose where the good pixels are so you can get rid of a bunch of these damaged areas that has too much around it to effectively work with the spot healing brush. The last tool we're going to talk about is the clone stamp tool. It's a little bit harder than the other two, and the difference between it and the other two is that it literally clones the pixels and it doesn't try to blend it at all for you. Let's see this in action. We'll choose the clone stamp tool on the toolbar, and just like the healing brush, I can do Alt click or Option click, and that's going to allow me to choose his face. And now if I paint, it's following along and it's painting his face. It's literally cloning those pixels. So I can let go, and you'll notice that as soon as I let go, it doesn't blend those pixels in. So that's not going to work out for us for this retouching, but it's going to work great for the shoulder area. I'll go back in history, and using Command plus or Control plus, zoom in on this blemish right here. The reason why you can't use the spot healing brush or the healing brush on this blemish right here is because they both blend pixels. And unfortunately, this blemish is both on light pixels and dark pixels, so when it tries to blend, those colors are going to try to smear together and look milky and blurry. So I'm going to make my clone stamp tool not as big as the blemish, but pretty close. And because it's right on this edge, I'm going to hold the Alt key and click right on that edge. And then as I move, you can see that it looks like I'm making the shoulder stick out or go in. And that's what we want to have happen. Now it's not going to work if the slopes are different. See how it doesn't work here? But this slope with the blemish is pretty much the same as the one I sampled from here. So it should work. So I'll hover over the edge of that blemish and try to get him to line up. And then I'm just going to start painting. And I can do one more time. And that got rid of that blemish without having any of the blurry or milky area. So another area like that would be his ear. And I can make it a little bit smaller. And again, we want to do the same kind of angle, so I can either come down here or a little bit up here. And sometimes this takes a little bit of practice. So I'll Alt click right there. And again, try to line it up like a puzzle piece. And fix that. Now, one thing you can do is you can Alt click out here in the dark area and paint that in. And then you can Alt click in the light area of his ear and then paint that in. That's another method of using that tool. So those are the 3 basic retouching tools that you can use to fix a damaged photo.